All right, we're recording. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we are meeting with Eric Fischl, and it is through the generosity of Kevin Wilder, who took a previous Klein Artist Works course, that we are sitting here with Eric. Kevin's been involved with the School of the Art Institute, and Eric has been working with Kevin on a number of projects, and Kevin was adamant about Eric participating. He really had no choice. And I'm assuming that all of you literate folks have read Eric's book, Bad Boy, which is a really, really good read. So we're not going to cover anything in that. No, but you know, you should read it if you haven't read it.
Anyway.
No, I won't. The ending hasn't been written yet. So Eric, greetings, good evening. You were raised on Long Island, right?
I was, yeah.
And
I was 18.
Now, one of the things that I find more interesting about you compared to many artists is, I mean, many artists feel like when they were in high school or when they were 4 years old that they knew they were going to grow up to be artists that was, you know, cast in sand or in stone or in something indelible. You didn't come to the fruition that art was your calling until later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, until I was 20.
And was it something that you know, like you were thunderstruck by it, or did it resonate, or did it seem easy? Or how did you guys choose art and you choose each other?
I had already flunked out of college once and tried alternative lifestyles and things. This was in the 60s, so pretty wild time, and none of that was working for me. In the meantime, my parents had moved from Fort Washington on Long Island to Phoenix, Arizona. So I went back home and laid around trying to pull myself together. Ended up enrolling in a junior college in Phoenix. And I took art classes because I figured if you're bad at art, you get a C. Nobody fails art, right? So, and the purpose was simply to meet people and you know, hopefully meet a girl, which I did. But I also found something in art that I didn't expect, which was that
I'm hearing somebody. I'm sorry, I can interrupt. I'm hearing somebody talking, and I can't find who they are. Or maybe it's Kate. There we go. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Thank you. So you found a girl, and you found art.
I found a girl, and I found art. What I found in art at the time was a very stimulating and competitive situation with my fellow students. That it was like game playing or something. We were all trying to blow each other's minds and having a lot of fun doing that. But what I really found was that it was the first time I could concentrate in my life, that making my work. I could also, it was the first time I could stand being alone. And those two things made me feel so integrated as a person that I figured even if I was shitty at it, I was going to continue to do it the rest of my life. And so I committed myself to it.
So how long did you stay at the junior college?
I was there a year, and then I transferred. I started to take myself more seriously and transferred to Arizona State University in a BFA program. And then I was there for a year, and then California Institute of the Arts opened up in 1970, and I went there to finish my school.
That was a super propitious moment to start Cal Arts.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was the end of the 60s for one thing, and Southern California, end of the 60s, it was a pretty wild time. The school was based on the new, whatever the hell that was, and we were all expected to teach our teachers, and so they didn't give us any instruction.
Okay, and you left there, and then what happens?
I went to Chicago.
Oh yeah, you were here at the School of the Art Institute for a bit, and you were at the.
I never went to the Art Institute. I actually was there, I got a job as a guard at the Museum of Contemporary Art.
Right.
Back when it was on Ontario Street, which was great.
How did you happen to, get a job as a guard? Did you move to Chicago first and look for work, and they said sure?
I moved to Chicago. I was with I ran away with a girl, and she wanted to go to Chicago, so we went to Chicago. And went around looking for jobs. I took on a few jobs first, and then one day, jobless, I was wandered into the museum. And I was talking to the receptionist, a woman named Jean Bulow, and we got to talking. And I said, I'm looking for work. He said, wait a minute. Ran downstairs. I think I got you a job. You can't beat that. You can't plan that one out. So.
No. And how long did you do that?
I did that for 2 years.
Were you making art while you were a guard?
I was trying to. Yeah. I was, fresh out of school. I was unlearning what I'd been taught, and I was trying to find my own voice, and I was experimenting, and all of it was shit, frankly. But it was the beginning anyway.
It's interesting. I guess to an extent you're self-educated. I mean, despite the fact that you've had a lot of, courses and stuff, would you say that the art you've made is a product of your education, or is it a product of self-discovery?
It's a product of some inspirational people along the way, and a group of peers who are really good artists in their own right, and that we had conversations and rivalries and stuff that sort of honed my focus, my instinct. And then, in terms of skill set, it was definitely about, teaching myself how to do it.
Was the dialogue throughout in different locales, or did it happen mostly after you left Chicago?
No, it was something that was a lot of the artists that were at Cal Arts, students at Cal Arts, went on to, impact the 80s. They were part of my peers in New York and stuff, as well as artists and friends that I met in Chicago, that also moved to New York in the late 70s, and so it was a generational thing that was very much there.
That's sweet. After Chicago, you decided that Nova Scotia was the threshold to success.
No, I had no map. I had no strategies. I was really sort of floating around. I was in Chicago, happily a guard at the museum, and I got a call in November from a former teacher of mine who was visiting the school in Nova Scotia. And he calls me up and said, I think I got you a job teaching. Do you want to teach? And I said, well, I never thought about it. Sure. And he said, they just fired their painting teacher and they need you here in January. Can you do it? And I said, yeah. So I packed up and went there.
As I recall from the book, there were some schisms in the philosophy of the art practice there, yes?
It was very similar to Cal Arts. There was an anti-painting environment. That's why they hired me. 2 years out of school with only a BFA, doing shit for work myself and whatnot. They could care less about painting, so they needed a body to sit in the class. And so they did that, and I ended up being there 4 years. But yeah, no, the environment was all towards conceptual art and other forms of other media, video and photography installation, etc.
Were you a contrarian in terms of not embracing that, or were you being true to yourself, or just evolving?
Well, I believe you don't choose to be a painter. You just choose to be a better one. And the reason I say that is because it's a sensibility that that is really the way a certain person built a certain way, processes information. And it comes through, color, shape, working with something that is, your hand, but it's also an extension of your reach, and working with a certain kind of feel of, this greasy material on some kind of surface, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are the way you connect to your feelings and process and order your experiences. So for me, it was natural to do it. What I hated was people telling me I shouldn't do it, that it was old-fashioned and unnecessary. So my job, I felt that my cause was to try to make work that felt alive, and so that that people couldn't deny it, and so I set out to do that.
You created a family that became content for your paintings. And how long did that last?
Well, I think it's to this day.
It
started out with a much more of a precise, sort of fictional bend to it. But one of the strategies I think artists have to develop is one that ensures that their work keeps going. So you want to find something that you can do that keeps evolving rather than has a kind of limited time and strategy for being made. So for me, the family structure offered a very open-ended matrix of exploration in terms of relationships, and so I was living in Nova Scotia, so early on I decided that this family would be a fishing family, with a father being a fisherman, and there would be sort of stuff centering around whatever that was. But ultimately, what it turned out was I knew nothing about fishing and the fisher family, and the struggles of the fisher people. And I was outside of my league, so I began to hone it more specifically to what I knew, which was the suburbs and that environment. You gave a talk at the Arts Club in Chicago recently, and there's one thing you said. There's many things that you said that resonated, but there's one that I haven't quite heard. Somebody expressed so much before, and there are things that I postulate in this class and share with people, and I really like it when I get support for it, because I sometimes I don't expect it. But one of the things I talk about is vulnerability, and that it's much safer than one thinks to be vulnerable, because the audience looks at the vulnerable content and sees themselves and looks at their own issues and their own strife, as opposed to going, oh my God, the artist is talking to me about this. It doesn't seem to work that way. I find that, from reading your book, the content of your art has become really clear and kind of obvious, but it wasn't obvious until I read it. Can you talk about that? Your comfort level of being vulnerable and the audience response to it? Well, I don't know whether you get comfortable with vulnerability, but it's something that I believe in, so I go for it. There's truth in it, and that's what I'm after, is the truth. And I think in terms of an audience, I think people look to art to connect, and they look to art to sort of as form givers. So you put into language, you put into visuals the things that are shared and meaningful to us. So it's like for me, it was a desire to do that. there was so much in the art world at the time that was not about that kind of content. It was much more conceptual, much more sort of intellectually based, philosophically based, etc., and not experiential in the same way that I was interested in. And so that combination of feeling like the work is talking over my head, and at the same time I'm being criticized for doing something that has no meaning, made me sort of go into an area that I was certain of, which could not be taken away from me. So if I talked directly, painted directly about my experiences, at the very least, it all sounds very defensive, and frankly, it was very defensive at the time. But it was like trying to find a place where you could say, I don't care what the bullshit is. This is something that's real, and so there. And it turned out that it resonated with a much larger audience than I'd even imagined. And the other thing, was up until the 70s, till my generation, the suburbs was not considered a legitimate genre at all.
Of course not.
So it was considered an empty space, a flatline existence. So no creativity could come out of it, etc. Of course, we were the first generation of kids who really grew up in the suburbs and actually knew exactly what the content of that place was. So we brought that to it.
When you are being vulnerable initially, is it, I don't know if you can look back on it and recall, but is this about a strategy that makes sense in terms of everybody else is doing something different, I should do this? Or was it you were being chastised and you chose to look inward? Now, I guess what I'm getting at is how much of it is being true to yourself and how much of it is looking at what's going on in the art world and looking for a path?
I think both of those things are operating at the same time. What you're trying to do is find yourself within the greater context. An example is, because painting was under such an attack, and imagery was under such an attack, the artists of my generation would do things like, we seem to be divided generationally between those who believed painting was dead and then made paintings that were dead to prove that they were dead. And those of us who believed painting was alive and tried to make alive painting. But we were looking in the same area for some kind of, for imagery that was, on its own had some kind of life to it, even if you couldn't paint it with life. And so there are things like the strategies of looking at, sexual imagery, pornography, looking at iconoclasm. If you go ahead and paint a portrait of Hitler, it doesn't matter how you handle it, as long as it's recognizable. Everyone will go, ooh, bad, Hitler, evil, whatever, etc. And so there was a thing going on that way, and I got to a point where I thought, if they can do, sexual imagery, I can do sexual imagery too. And so the first painting I did to sort of enter that dialogue was a painting of a young boy standing in the middle of a kiddie pool at night, maybe peeing or maybe masturbating. It's not clear what he's doing, but somehow you come onto that scene and it's strange confrontation with boundaries and also youthful energy, self-discovery, etc. The thing is, when I was painting it, rather than choose a sort of a safe pornographic image, easily recognizable pornographic image, I chose something that that was very private and personal, without thinking a whole lot about why I was doing this. I just did it, and it turned out to be something that wasn't a dirty painting at all. It was a painting that there was very much about a point in a male's life, a child, self-discovery, etc., that had a lot of resonance to it. So that actually forced me to re-examine other taboos to see if I could, if those taboos were legitimate or I could explode them. And I went after that.
When people first had familiarity with your art, it would be easy to conclude that it was fairly provocative. And after looking at it or seeing, sequential images over a period of a couple of years, the provocation isn't as extreme because we're more familiar, it becomes familiar. Do you then try and step up being provocative, or how does the dialogue with your audience change?
Well, I think the provocation, but there's a certain sensational aspect in the early work that was, meant to attract attention. And I think that's very important, however one does it for a young artist, to try to figure that out. I think what you're trying to do as an artist is you're trying to find an audience. Whatever it is that attracts that audience, you have to figure out how to trigger that mechanism. Whatever attracts the audience, and then once you have the audience, then what you do is you keep them interested. You try to keep them interested. And the way I try to keep them interested is by trying to keep myself interested as well. I never wanted to be an artist that, made paintings of, boys that stayed boys. It's not. I never had the Peter Pan fantasy and stuff. So I started my journey looking at prepubescence, that time in a male's life when they're in transition, because it's a powerful time. But my ambition was to, grow old with my character, and because each of those stages of our lives are absolutely compelling and provocative in their own way, and certainly complicated. So, if someone were to survey my work, they would see that, the boy grows up.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like your audience is perpetually people about your age or within 10 years of your age?
People who buy the work are sort of within that realm. Yeah. In terms of the audience, no. I get a lot of correspondence from college kids and stuff like that, and so it's hard to say.
How many, you talk about the Fischer family and, a body of work that deals with like a certain kind of content or thematic issues. How many of those have you had in your career or since Nova Scotia?
Well, I've had I don't actually know. To me, it all feels of a piece, but there are definitely some series within my work there was but let me make a distinction here between that and, I think what artists are trying to do, need to do, have to do is discover and then develop themes that are part of their life. What writers call their voice, etc. There's a once you've developed your themes, once you expose them and then develop them, you begin to learn how to shape them, and that begins to go through transformations that stay the same. I mean, I'm not making a whole lot of sense here, I know it, but
making some. I can push some clarity, but I think that work that deals with and being in India is thematically different. I mean, it's still the same artist and it's still the same hand, but it's a voice talking about a different topic for me. And again, with portraits of friends and self. Do you feel like there's more continuity than I'm suggesting?
Yeah, because I think that if you do something, like for me, India was the opposite of familiarity. It was the most other alien environment I'd ever experienced. And it was something where I relied heavily on being able to read body language and to understand the signals in terms of social exchange. And you go to India and I understood nothing. And so it was somehow trying to capture the opposite of what I had been doing before seems all of a piece to me. The taking the clothes off of people in my world, using nakedness as a currency of exchange. In my world, going to India where it's the opposite, where it's the most clad, the most spectacularly strange and exotic and beautiful, and whatever shapes that are come from being veiled and mysterious. It just seemed like so it was all part of a piece, knowing and not knowing. And the portraits are they're not outside the genre of painting, and they're not outside the genre of somebody like myself who wants to capture their moment in time. All the people that I do portraits of are people who are themselves creative. They're writers and poets and playwrights and musicians and things like that. They're people who have entertained us or given us a tremendous, sort of broadened our sense of the moment. And so I felt that, as a painter, which can capture those moments and monumentalize them, it was a good thing for me to do. So I do that as well. But they're, fundamentally different in that they're not narratives. They're just sort of straightforward. Look at this person.
A lot of these things, input for your content, seems to come from the serendipity of travel. I mean, you would be invited to go somewhere to speak, to appear at an exhibit, and there would be a byproduct of experiencing the locale, and it would find its way into your work.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, I mean, I guess it's sort of, I want to talk about, you to talk about the balance between premeditated and accident, and how they can both come together in the art.
Okay, there's very little premeditation in my practice. what I do is try to set up a situation. I work from photographs. The photographs I've taken in my travels, and they're photographs are things where I'm watching people do something that I'm absolutely fascinated with. I don't know why I'm watching it. I just am. And I have my camera and I click the camera. And when I get home, I look at my photos and the same thing happens. I'm riveted by somebody turning a certain way, walking a certain way, bending, twisting, you know, whatever. There's something there. Then my practice is to, now I do it in Photoshop. Before I did it sort of freehand on the canvas, but now I do it in Photoshop first, and that is to cut that person out of that context and try to put them in another context to see if that helps explain what it was that riveted me. And I throw things at that. It's, you know, is it more clarifying if this person is not doing it out on the street, but is doing it in the kitchen? You know, is it, you know, are they turning in a certain way that they're beginning to move out of the space, or are they moving into the space? Is somebody else in the room? So, you know, what else is around? I just start talking to myself and creating these scenes until I arrive at something that feels sort of pregnant with meaning and significance, even though it's not nailed down to specific meaning. And so that's how I work. So premeditation is not a part of it, in that, except in the smallest way, which is I'm looking for something, and the rest is, you know, comes in as association, intuition, and then within the painting process, translating it from the collages that I make. You know, the accidents occur, and you know, things that I thought worked didn't work. Things go out. Color choice, I, you know, wasn't anticipating begins to resonate a certain way.
I thought it was interesting to learn that in the olden days, you would work with scrims that you would draw on and then hang in front of or tape onto the canvas to move people positions around, right? And then you would paint, and then when you'd find things and you'd paint from that, as opposed to placing them directly on the canvas and then moving them 6 inches away.
Yeah. No, actually not. I didn't. I wish I had, actually. I wish you were there when I was doing this, because it would have made it a lot easier. I was much stupider than that. I was the scrims you're talking about were an independent thing. I was just working on a wall with transparent paper. Then I'd paint a chair on one piece of paper and then overlay another piece of paper and say, you know, who's sitting here? Are they standing? Are they walking? Or, you know, et cetera. When it came to painting, I was working at first off of you know, little photo snapshots that I took in a film loop, and I would, you know, isolate the person and freehand draw it onto the canvas, and hopefully I got it in the right place. And you know, if I didn't, I'd have to scrape it off and start over. With the Photoshop, it made it easier. Now I was reluctant to go to technology quickly, because I was educated by sort of second generation abstract expressionists, and one of the things that they sort of imparted on me was that the ethic of the expressionists was discovery and execution had to happen simultaneously on the canvas in order to create an authentic experience. I love that, frankly, because it makes painting heroic and dangerous and, you know, full of pitfalls and et cetera. But you know, with Photoshop, it seemed like I was separating discovery and execution, and I thought it would kill the painting. And what I found out was that, in fact, by separating discovery and execution, the paintings grew richer.
Why?
Because I was free to paint. I wasn't so worried about what it was I was painting. I had that in a way, and I could just attack it. And so it opened something up.
So what happens when the image now goes from Photoshop to the canvas? How does it get there?
Same way. I start every painting differently, and I freehand the drawing on it. Sometimes I draw with paint. Sometimes I draw with charcoal, or, you know, whatever. I don't grid it off. I don't project it. I just paint it. I deliberately use canvases that are different proportions than the photo collage, so I have to constantly readjust the image to fit the canvas, and you know, keeps the painting process alive.
That's interesting. Are there other, for lack of a better term, tricks that you use to push yourself?
Well, there, you know, in terms of sort of creating narratives, you know, sort of projecting myself into other people or sexes or, you know, whatnot as a way of sort of re-examining something is one of the strategies I use. And you know, I mean, the great thing about painting is you can make anything in the painting have consciousness. So, you know, there are paintings that I've done with chairs, the witness, and or the dog, or, you know, some other object becomes the witness and seems to be, you understand what's going on through their presence, and you know, inanimate objects. So things like that.
You know, I was reading an article today about a kid who was assigned at high school homework about authors using metaphors, and he got tired of the assignment, so he wrote all the authors. And he said, you know, do you consciously put metaphors into your painting, into your stories? You know, most of them said no. A fair number of them said, go do your own damn homework, and some of them said yes. Do you consciously put metaphors into your work?
I do not put metaphors in my work. I discover the metaphor.
That's what others said. Yeah.
Yeah, and that you know, it's where the truth lies. You know, you something that is both familiar and takes on a universal sort of resonance, precisely because it's a metaphor for something that, you know, beyond itself.
When did you start? And then let's open this up for some questions, you guys. This is I got more, but this will be my last one, and then you start throwing some hands up, and let's see what Eric has to say for you. When did you start exploring and pushing different media?
Well, I think I've always done it. You know, I narrowed it down. I mean, when I was in school, of course, you were encouraged to you know, try video and photography and performance and, you know, different things like that. So I dabbled in those things. But once I got clear about how I made work, with the way my hands work, my eyes work, etc., then it narrowed down to, you know, painting and printmaking, and of course there's a variety of printmaking techniques that are interesting, and I've explored them and stuff, drawing, watercolors.
You haven't said sculpture. Everything you've described so far is two-dimensional, which I think has...
No, I was just about to go into
for
sculpture.
Okay, sorry.
And photography was another thing, and actually it was photography that led me to sculpture, ironically, because I had been working with photographs of people. I'd taken these photos of people on beaches, and I had done a lot of paintings on that, and it was getting sort of tiresome. I was beginning to repeat myself. But the characters that I was using felt like a theater troupe. And I was so familiar with them in the photograph, which was only from one side. I began to wonder if I knew them so well, I could actually sculpt them into a three-dimensional character, so I could then move them around and see them from other sides. So that's what I did. I just started to make these little sculptures of characters I had in paintings and photos. What I discovered in photography, in sculpture, that I find compelling is that it unlocks a different part of my creative brain. Because if you say you reduce painting to this, the hand follows what the eye sees. In sculpture, oftentimes your hands move away from what your eye can see and continue to work. And what it does is it unlocks the memories that your hands have that you can't access through your eyes. And so it dimensionalizes the brain in a way that I find very exciting. So I've been kind of pursuing that. I think sculpture is so opposite of painting that it mystifies me. I don't actually know what it is. I like the modeling part of it, but I don't actually know what the thing is.
I think they're really different, and I think many artists are not good at both. And I think, somebody said painters sit, sculptors pace or walk, and, there's a fair amount of truth in that. You can always tell if you're in a painter's studio, probably yours included, that there's a chair that's sort of paint encrusted, which doesn't appear in most sculptor studios.
Was it Barnett Newman or Bosco who said sculpture is what you trip over when you back up to look at a painting?
Yes, it was. Then there's some other quotes that come after that. But anyway, before I turn this over, I had another question. So you've been...
You lied.
It's true. So you've had a really solid career for 3 decades plus. It is, anyone's career is somewhat mercurial. It's got high points. The trajectory you had couldn't be sustained. No one could. How do you deal emotionally or intellectually with the ups and downs and the wondering if does anybody care again? And yes.
You mean, how do you become relevant for a second time, a third time?
Well, no, that's not the question. What do you do at the moment you're not relevant before you become relevant for the second and third time?
Yeah. Well, you don't necessarily notice you're not relevant immediately.
Oh, so denial works. Okay.
So you got that going, yeah. And then it's different kinds of irrelevance. It sounds so pathetic to talk about it in a way, but it's so real at the same time.
Yes.
But I think the structure of an artist is one in which they make things out of love, looking for love, and they're looking for a profound echo of something from what they do that comes back to them and makes them feel connected, makes them feel whole, etc. And unfortunately, part of that makeup is that when somebody else is getting that attention, you start thinking, first of murder and then and other things, so that trying to figure out if you one, you're pursuing what you're supposed to be doing, and two, are you doing it well enough that it deserves more attention, or is there something you need to re-examine, or things like that. Not so much about chasing it again, but the doubts are always there. So I don't know. The world changed dramatically from the time my career started to where it is now, that I wouldn't have stood a chance now doing what I did and approaching it the way I approached it. I would have never made it into the light.
I don't agree. What you're saying is the assumption that if you hadn't been Eric Fischl, somebody else would have been. And I'm saying that.
No, I'm just saying that the way the art world has changed, there's such a different focus on what it is, what art is, and what we're looking for from it. That it's my work wouldn't have been seen in the context. The reason it made the light of day had everything to do with the confluence of what was going on in the late 70s and early 80s, which was unprecedented within the history of art. Unprecedented in the sense that the entire structure of the art world was breaking down. And it was being broken down by artists who were coming at it from so many different angles with such power and passion to find their rightful place at the table, that the structure itself couldn't handle just the sheer amount of diversity that was being hit with, and it began to crumble. And then there was that part of that moment was so wrapped up in the identity quest, the liberation narrative, the identity quest, and it was coming from feminists and from artists of color and artists of gender, and it's coming from German identity or Italian identity or all these things that happen. Photography identity, figure painting identity. Everything was an attempt to assert something into that moment at the same time. And it was nobody knew what was good or bad. There was no clear sort of quality structure that anyone. The critical background was breaking down by the day. We went from scholarship, at the end of the 70s, so it was still scholarship, to by the end of the 80s, it was little blurbs on, arts and entertainment sections of magazines. So, I don't know where I was going with that, but.
We'll bail you out with a question. Rick, go ahead. Hold on, let me unmute you first. Go ahead, Rick.
In what you would say to, what do you want people to receive from your artwork, or particularly people that that have been living with your paintings for a while? Have you ever heard a story or how it's impacted them personally that's been, kind of cool for you, that you... what happens to them when they live with your paintings?
I have never really had deep conversations with collectors about not just my work but any work. It's sort of a puzzle that way, but I wouldn't know how to answer that particular question that way. I used to think that the work I was doing, nobody would really want to live with. I felt it belonged within a public sphere, that it was something that you wanted to know about, you wanted to visit. It belonged out in a broader world, but I couldn't imagine people actually wanting to have it in their living room, or where do you put it, and then I found that in fact the public world wouldn't touch it because it was too sexual or too edgy in that way, and in fact the private world seemed to love possessing it. So as I said, I never had any kind of really deep or compelling, memorable conversations with collectors about how moving and meaningful, and every day I wake up and I think, whatever, that doesn't happen. for me. So
Interesting. I hope that does happen. Thanks, Rick. Sam, go ahead, Sam.
Thanks for talking to us, Eric. I loved your book. I love the part about the painting a painting before the action happens or just after. That was really helpful. And you're completely relevant. Your work is personal and so personal, it's universal. And I was wondering, I saw that you were in a group show with Jules Valancourt. Do you know his work?
I know that name, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, you talked in your book, it sounds like you have a problem with some of the work happening today that's flat and without light and that kind of thing. And I can see maybe Jules' work being like that, but yet your work sits with it so well and holds a space. Do you find that, do you not think about how your work relates to work like you described in your book? How do I just, do you relate to it at all, or do you feel repelled by it? And what are you working on now?
It's hard to know which word you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was describing certain kinds of work in the book, or more specifically, and I don't know Valancourt's work, or can't call it to mind. So, but there's certain kinds of work that I absolutely have difficulty with. For example, there's the younger generation of artists who grew up with technologies, have used technologies to generate ideas for their work, not have turned to technology to help them develop some work, but actually it uses the technology as a way of developing work. And it shows. And also there's a thing where there's a kind of visual illiteracy that has crept into the art world, both in terms of artists as well as in terms of collectors, where because we're receiving imagery in so many different forms, the sort of essential and basic aspects of painting have been lost. And so people, they'll receive an image on their iPhone, and then they'll see an image on a billboard, and then they'll see it on a large TV screen, and then they'll see it on whatever. And because of that, you lose a sense that a painted object has to have a sense of scale to it. So you see a lot of artists who work with not scale, but they work with size. And size is, small, medium, large, extra large. Scale is something where you take somebody out of their moment and bring them by actually changing the way they feel inside their body as they're looking at something that you've created. So you're as part of your skill set as a painter, you're trying to change the way people feel in relationship to the thing that you're making, so that they can see it new and see themselves and freshly in that context. And I'm sure we've all had that experience where you look at something, a painting, and you feel diminished in size. You're looking at something, and it's not even that big a painting, but you feel like you're miniaturized, or you're looking at something and you feel like you're almost like God. You're taking the POV of God looking. That's what scale does. And so that's something that's been lost, as well as you find people talking about, I saw a watercolor of yours. And it wasn't a watercolor; it was an oil paint. My wife, who does these amazing charcoal drawings, they often refer to them as photographs. They're not even photographically realistic, but the black and white thing, they go, oh, I love that photograph, or those kinds of things are profoundly affecting the kind of art that is being done and the way we're understanding it. So
Right.
That's the stuff I have trouble with.
I was just wondering what you're working on.
Right now, I'm working on a series of paintings about art fairs.
Cynical.
It's our world.
Yeah, unfortunately, isn't it? Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Marlene, go ahead.
Hi, Eric. It's delightful to have you here this evening. My question for you is, in your book, especially the late 70s, early 80s, you start talking about you're the new generation. And you and I are a year apart. And so I am of the same generation you are. So my question to you is, what is our generation, the boomer generation, contributing to the art world and specifically to painting from your perspective?
What do you mean, what do we contribute?
Well, every generation contributes something, right? I mean, in the 50s and the 60s, it was pop, and then it was, so every generation contributes something. The abstract expressionists were one generation, followed by the pop culture, right, followed by us, right? And although there's conceptualism as part of what we do, so is feminism part of what we do. I mean, Jenny Holzer and Cindy Sherman. So isn't it possible that our generation has really taken that pyramid structure and flattened it? There's not the pinnacle that there once was, that there was one style of painting and one ideology, but now there are multiple ideologies and multiple, like what Paul refers to as art villages. And that is our big contribution to the painting world. And yours specifically is returning to the narrative, which was missing for 100 years, and also dealing with very intimate feelings. I think you're painting your childhood, but in many ways you're painting our childhood.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I said earlier that the sort of impetus for the work coming out of the 70s, 60s, 70s into the 80s, which was when it became full blown, was an identity quest. And there was a tremendous sort of political agenda attached to that. A lot of artists were trying through their art to break down all kinds of power structures within the society. I think we all shared a belief at that time that art actually could change the world, and so we moved and strategized with our work to have that kind of impact. I think we were wrong on some levels, very much so about that. But no, I think there was a thing, and it was going to manifest itself, as you said, from getting rid of the pyramidal construct to a more of a horizontal kind of flow. Plurality was very much a part of it, and consciousness raising was very much a part of it.
Cool.
Yes.
Thanks, Maureen. John.
Okay,
Sorry, John, go ahead.
Eric, it is a real pleasure to actually speak to you. The whole webinar would have been just worth this. I'm a fan of your work. Haven't even read the book yet. Going to do that. I like your sculpture as well as your painting, and I thought Tumbling Woman was one of the most appropriate responses to 9/11. And I just wanted to ask you, what was it like to be so profoundly misunderstood?
It's a nightmare. Any artist would suffer that. The whole thing of making art is to be understood, not to be misunderstood. So yeah, no, it showed me to some extent, it showed me the degree to which art has lost its its connection to a greater society. You know, that we were. I mean, the thing that I was accused of in that sculpture was so cynical that it just blew my mind that someone would think that anyone could be that cold, callous, and calculating with such an enormous tragedy that just happened, and we were still, you know, reeling from. And it just showed me that people sort of were just disconnected. I thought that the 9/11 was something where all artists would be needed at this moment, because the thing was so chaotic, so painful, so frightening, so you know, profound, that it was going to need us to sort of make sense of it. And then I was disheartened when the society didn't turn to us saying, help us out, you know, make us things to ease our pain, our feeling of isolation, our horror, or, you know, whatever, you know, help us. And so that was saddening. And then I was also saddened by the number of artists who didn't want to participate, didn't want to, you know, sort of try to explore the experience, that they sort of felt that it was inappropriate, or that it was something that they would suffer privately from, but wouldn't make art out of it, or something like that.
I think that it'll be appreciated later, and again, a lot of the responses were maudlin. It was honest, and I thank you for it. I thank you for your work.
Well, thank you.
Cool, John, that was sweet. Thank you. Maybe one more question. Maybe it depends how long we go. Joanne, your turn.
Related to John's question, I saw your video of the commencement speech last year. I think everyone has. It's gone viral, and I appreciate it. I also went to the Humanities Festival and heard you speak about your project, America Here and Now, which I thought was a wonderful project. I appreciate the fact that you were very honest during that time as well, in saying that you felt that it didn't reach the potential that you wanted it to. I was just curious to know if your developing America Here and Now came out of what happened with the sculpture, and if you thought that that would be something that would be a further step for the creative community.
Yeah, I think that it certainly sparked by the tumbling woman controversy. But even more than that, I mean, you know, as time went on after 9/11, the country just became so ugly, so frightened, so angry, so, you know, just it was like something that would seem to be breaking down into smaller and smaller tribal units in order to deal with the chaos. And you know, all of a sudden you're living in this country that you believed in the values of, and meanwhile they're torturing people, you know, and so it seemed like we are so far off our center. And the constant kind of screaming and yelling, the taste for the black and white that the media had to break everything down into rhetoric and to you know, just vicious discourse, seemed like that wasn't going to get us anywhere. So to me, the one thing that art does is that it shows you how you're connected to somebody else empathetically without having to rely on words and you know, sound bites and things like that. So it's more about, I just thought it would be a good exercise to try to insert art into a conversation with people where they found they had more in common than they did in things that, you know, separated them. So that was my dumb idea.
I don't think it was a dumb idea at all. I really enjoyed when you talked at the Humanities Festival about the unexpected outcome from doing that juried show and what happened with that. And I thought that it was a great idea, and I think it still continues. You know, your project still continues online.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wish it had gone farther in the direction that I really wanted it to go in, but it was a tremendous learning curve. You know, I mean, I'm obviously not a business person, so one of the things I found out very quickly was, you know, artists have it's part of their skill set. They have the ability to live with uncertainty for great lengths of time. And the business world can't tolerate uncertainty at all. So when an artist goes in to talk to them about this project, this vision, this, you know, whatever, you know, they're just sitting there looking like, you know, where's the bottom line to this? How do we, you know, whatever. So.
Thanks, Joanne. All right, let's do, I think it was good. Let's do one more question. Ellen, you have the last question. Go ahead, Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Sure.
Eric, I just want to thank you so much for speaking to us. I really so much related, and I'm sure everyone else did, to so many things you said, and I just want to particularly thank you for articulating the, I guess, the goal of the artist and the struggle of the artist. I really, it makes me feel less alone to hear how you were describing, you know, what the artist does. I just really related to what you were saying, and I'm sure a lot of other of us did as well. And I really appreciate everything that you said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, that's my role to say the thank you thing. All right, awesome. Eric, I think this has been great. At the risk of being accused of having a bromance, I think you are a remarkable human being. You're quite intelligent. You're really perceptive. You're really good with your hands. You're a hell of an artist. You're a good thinker. You care about, you know, things much larger than yourself and your relationship to your art. You care about society and the country and global issues. I think you're really, really remarkable. And that said, it's not surprising you're successful. You know, I mean, you bring an awful lot to this. And this has been really wonderful to have you share this hour plus with us this evening. Let me unmute everybody so that they can echo that, but I think it's been fabulous. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. He's great.